Well, welcome everybody. I'm Jim Moiso, and we're glad you're here. And we're going to talk about lots of things having to do with Warm Springs, and Beverly's going to start. Maybe we should show them where it is first.
Go for it.
Okay.
Yes.
I'm going to walk around with a map, and I'll point to where Warm Springs is, because some people don't know where this independent country is. I mean that. Independent country is in the middle of our state.
Yeah, it's in Oregon.
It's this gray spot.
Mm-hmm.
It's bigger than Rhode Island, right? Those are the top mountains.
It's small compared to what they had.
Thank you for that clarification. It's big as the country.
Don't be afraid to come on forward. Okay, continue to enter and find a chair, but come on forward, those of you who are just coming in now. My name is Beverly Crow, and I'm on the Administrative Commission of the Presbytery that's working with and for the church in Warm Springs that has been one of the churches in this presbytery for 150 years, 150, longer than many other churches in the presbytery. But it's kind of hidden away, or we think it's hidden away, and we haven't been too involved in it for many years. And with a change in pastors and in that process, some of us in Presbytery said it's time to re-engage with that church and let them know that they're part of a larger church than just their small group. So Jim and I are part of the Administrative Commission that has been working, for 20 months, and we don't know how much longer it will go, but we're making a lot of progress and we're learning a lot about Warm Springs. So I'm going to start because which is hard for me. I don't talk about myself a lot in groups and so on, but we all come with who we are and what our experience has been. Maybe you've had some experience with Warm Springs or some other native settlements. Maybe you haven't. And now, beginning with knowing about the Presbytery's mission at Warm Springs, you can be part of that. So I'm just going to briefly tell a little bit about who I am, because I'm not just part of a committee. This is deep work for me, besides being part of a committee, which we've got a good team going. But I know what I look like in a mirror, so I know what you're seeing when you look at me. What you can't see and don't know is that I'm also part African American and part Native American and Caucasian. I have 3 children, one of each of those definitions. So I have lived my adult life learning how to parent a Native American, an African American, and a child who was born to me, or to us. We started our family when Dave was still in seminary. He was pastoring in an inner city church in Louisville, all-black church. That was our church, and that's when we had our first child. There is no congregation that loves a new baby like a black congregation. Let me tell you, they threw a shower for me because they knew we were far away from kinfolk. And then, I don't know if it was 2 or 3 weeks after Dallas was born, we drove up, and they poured out at the church saying, "The baby is here, the baby is here." And the next thing I knew, I had lost my baby. And he was being introduced to everybody in the congregation and loved upon like I have never experienced a congregation loving upon a newborn. We might peek under the covers and say, oh, how sweet. This child was taken from me and introduced to everybody personally. So that's my experience. Later after Dallas was with us for a couple of years, we wanted to add to our family. We didn't think it was good to add to the population, so we looked into adoption and went to our first meeting, and being given a paper to fill out with all sorts of questions, we called the worker over and said, these questions don't make sense to us. We aren't looking for a baby that would look like us. Woo! We got ushered into the next room, and we were there for over an hour and talking and asking all kinds of questions. And when we were excused and walked out on the sidewalk, I still remember very clearly, Dave put his arm around my shoulder and said, hon, I think you're about 8.5 months pregnant. He was off by a month or so. And we had our Native American daughter, 3 days old, of Warm Springs heritage. So my connection with Warm Springs goes way, way back. A few years after that, we wanted one more child. We adopted a 2-year-old. Adopting a 2-year-old and a newborn are pretty different experiences. But Mike is African American in heritage, and so I have parented 3 children, 3 different racial backgrounds and ethnicities. It's a wild ride. It's been a wonderful ride. So that's my background with Warm Springs. I've known about it for, I'd reveal Heather's age if I told you, but over 50 years. So then to come finally from the many years in the Midwest, that's where our kids grew up. Back in Oregon, Dave's part of the Presbyterian staff, and one of the churches that he needs to oversee is Warm Springs. So from the time he came back here for that job, have been attached with, informed about, related to Warm Springs Church in some ongoing kind of ways. And then our daughter, who is Warm Springs background, ended up, when she came out to see what this Warm Springs reservation was all about, met and fell in love with a man. They lived in Salem for a while, but they've lived on the reservation for many, many years. So I'm very familiar with Warm Springs and happy to be on this official kind of team that's trying to get the whole presbytery involved and knowing who and what these people are in Warm Springs. They have been a part of the presbytery, now hold on, for 150 years. Longer than many of our churches have been in existence. And for the last several years, our attachments and our relationships have not been tended to. And so part of our commission is gearing back up. They're without a pastor right now, and it's time to get on board and for the rest of the presbytery to know who they are, where they are. It's a mission church. It will always need our help. It will never be financially independent, ever. It's just not feasible. And so we have to learn a lot about them, take under our wings this church, and I don't think there could have been a more appropriate text, Scott, than our being here today. We are brothers and sisters in the faith, and we lead different routes, and it's time to re-engage with those in Warm Springs. They're Presbyterians, and they're our neighbors, even though neighbor is 2 hours away. So that's just a little bit of my background, and we have a very active and good administrative commission. We meet monthly. We've made a lot of progress. We've got a little ways to go, and there's a whole story about the Mans, but Jim, I'll let you start in on the reservation.
So one of the things that we have been committed to as the Administrative Commission is learning. We've got a couple of people on the commission who live on the Warm Springs. They are Warm Springs, including her daughter, Heather. The rest of us are like us. And what we decided we needed to do was to learn, to not come in with any kind of answers or solutions, because that is, first of all, enormously paternalistic. It's what we white folks like to do. We're going to come in and we're going to fix them. Also because we're the ones with the money and therefore the power. How do we not do that again? How do we make space for God to do something new? So that's been a really important part of how we've tried to function. How do we learn? So we need to learn about history, and I'm just going to tell you a whole lot of history that I didn't know. The Warm Springs Reservation is home to the Warm Springs and the Wasco and the Northern Paiute tribes, all three tribes. Before 1855, they lived in different places in the Northwest. Traditionally, the Warm Springs tribe lived along the tributaries of the Columbia, the Deschutes, and the John Day Rivers. They depended on roots and game and berries. The Wascos lived along the Columbia and Hood River and the Dalles, and they were primarily fishers and traders and farmers, which meant they had a lot of connections because of that waterway. They were the foremost traders in the area because of their location. That's two. Number three, the Northern Paiutes. They lived in the Northern Great Basin in southeastern Oregon. Think about how different that is than the Columbia. The Paiutes migrated further and more frequently, and they were basically hunter-gatherers and fishers. Each tribe had its own language, and while the Warm Springs and the Wascos were traditionally very peaceful and worked with each other and interacted a lot with each other, neither had peaceful relationships with the Paiutes. Are you beginning to feel something? During the 1800s, waves of settlers began to travel through and settle in the tribal territories. They inadvertently brought diseases with them. 80 to 90% of the Wasco and Warm Springs people died as a result. By the way, that would mean that 3 or 4 of us would be in the room. The rest of us would be dead. Smallpox came in the 1770s. A malaria-like disease in the 1830s, which claimed almost 90% of the people on the Columbia. We're now down to 3 or 2 here, by the way. In 1844, scarlet fever, whooping cough, dysentery, typhoid, and in 1848, the measles. Now, none of that was intentional. But think about the trauma of the civilizations of those 3 tribes to that civilization. Think about how the tiny remnant left had to figure out how to survive. From 1843 to 1852, the number of settlers coming through the territory increased from 1,000 to 12,000 per year. In 1855, Joel Palmer, the superintendent of the Oregon Territory, was ordered to clear the Indians from their lands by our federal government. And that year, 1855, that year, the Warm Springs and the Wasco tribes ceded, C-E-D-E-D, 10 million acres of their property to the government, which they had inhabited for 10,000 years, in exchange for 464,000 acres. 10 million to 464,000. And they also were given the rights to self-govern and to farm and to fish. A comment about farming. Those of you that have been on the Warm Springs Reservation know that it is the most fertile land in all of Oregon. Not. Okay. The Northern Paiutes chose not to participate in this, and over the years continued to raid the reservation. Are you hearing complexity and trauma and challenge here? In 1874, the Warm Springs Presbyterian Church was started, 17 years after the reservation. In 1878, there was the Bannock War. And finally, the United States Army defeated the Paiute Indians. And they imprisoned a whole bunch of them, and they moved others to the Yakima Reservation. And then in the 1880s, in great wisdom, they decided to move the Paiutes to the Warm Springs Reservation. These people who had been raiding. Think about that dynamic being forced again upon them. What we need to understand is that the people on the reservation are living with this trauma now as part of their history. Life on the reservation was extremely difficult. The reservation couldn't provide enough salmon. That area we know was awful to try to farm. The best farmland we know is just over to the east when you get over to Madras and you see all those wonderful fields. That's not reservation territory. The national goal for indigenous people was to help them become Americans and to fit into the new white dominant culture. Now, it's easy for us here to sort of say, you awful people, how could you do that? I have to remember that they were being as sincere and honest as they could be, understanding the situation at the time was, how do we help these people become a part of this new society? Well, they need to become like us. Makes sense. We hear from time to time about the boarding schools, and the Warm Springs had a couple of them. The big one is across the street from the church, by the way, and down one block. Late last year, President Biden issued an apology, or the year before, President Biden issued an apology for the schools which had ripped children from their homes and families, cutting their hair and forcing them to speak English, and physically punishing them for not assimilating. The first time that a president has apologized for that. The Warm Springs schools followed the standard pattern across the country. This curriculum pushed an assimilationist program aimed at erasing their culture and replacing it with ours. Given the traumatic nature of that process, the pupils and their parents responded in a variety of ways. Some students openly resisted and ran away. Others practiced modesty because the best students were often moved off the reservation to, for example, the Chemwa Indian School in Salem, where they were cut off entirely from their families, and their families could not visit. A number of parents resisted the pressure of the government agents. Still others decided that it would be really good if their kids could learn both cultures and appreciate both of them. Listen to the words of Vesta Johnson, a person we know who talked about the Warm Springs, and she said this through her tears. My heart aches for my elders because I know that they went through a lot. The elders that are still alive, they need help now. You can't forget that generational atrocity has impacted their children and their children's children. Johnson's mother, Ginger Smith, was sent to the Warm Springs boarding school. As a kid, she was called Jabberjaw by her friends because she talked all the time, and she was full of playful energy. When she was in the boarding school, she got into trouble for talking too much in class. They put her mother in a corner, feet and hands bound with a rope and a cloth covering her mouth, according to Johnson. She was left in the corner the entire day, not even allowed to use the bathroom, she said. After such traumatic experiences, she said that her mother became much quieter and was reserved for the rest of her life. Dolores Jimerson, a behavioral health education director in Portland, said, "There's so much pain and grief that many of us carry through our bloodlines. I don't know a single tribal person who has not had a relative in a boarding school." One of the things that the Administrative Commission is learning is the reality of generational trauma. I didn't know anything about that until we started with this. An expert in the field says everyone is a victim. We know that there are actual changes that happen in our DNA from wounds, ancestral family wounds from generations back, and that we carry the wounds of our ancestors in our bodies. Generational trauma. Mercy. Yeah, what we've learned is that's a part of the living reality of everybody on the reservation. Something we can't imagine because it's not our trauma. That's what they bring to life every day, having to cope with that. In 1924, the Native Americans received citizenship and a right to vote. In 1937, the Indian Reorganization Act happened so that in 1938, the three tribes were incorporated and they adopted a constitution and a form of government. It's composed of a chief of each tribe. So we have 3 chiefs, and they occupy the office for life, whether or not they are functional. You heard me. You're beginning to hear some complexity even there. And a council of elected members, 8 of them. They also have a judicial system on the reservation. Remember, they're an independent country. By the way, that also means that if you're involved in an automobile accident on the reservation, you get their emergency people. People don't come from Madras. They don't call them from Madras or Redmond to come get you. It's an independent country, and they have their own system there. From the beginning, the reservation's boundaries have been in dispute. Finally, in 1972, they were resolved, and the reservation is now 644,000 acres, 1,019 square miles. According to the 2000 census, there were 3,314 people living there, inhabitants, and in 2003, the total tribal enrollment was 4,200. This is a third world country in the middle of Oregon. Poverty pervades these people. Not all of them are poor, but poverty pervades these people. Substance abuse of all kinds is rampant. Has to do with trauma and poverty and isolation. Has to do with everything that goes with substance abuse. An idea of the challenge of the distance. A former member of our administrative commission lives 20 miles from the church, and she's not living at the edge of the reservation, just to drive 20 miles to church. Heather, Bev's daughter, and her husband live 14 miles from the church. Still not on the edge of the reservation. That's one of the challenges of the reservation, is just distance and isolation and paying for gasoline if you're poor. Beverly and I were talking about the fact that the piano needs tuning, and we've got the money to tune the piano in the church. The nearest piano tuner may be in Bend. We can't get the person to come that far. A challenge of living on the reservation. I think the Administrative Commission is guided by, I think, a question that we keep asking ourselves. And that is, how do we make space for God to create something new here? In this place of overwhelming opportunity and overwhelming challenge, and I really mean both. To our knowledge, as we talk to people, there is not a minister of any church living on the reservation right now. It's empty of that. And this enormous challenge and opportunity. The congregation is, well, we don't know what its size is, but we guess between 10 and 15 members. Almost all of them are poor, old, enormously faithful. They're there today in worship. We've been able to bring almost every Sunday a guest preacher, because we decided the first thing we needed to make sure happened was that worship continued as a place for people to come. What we're learning as people talk to us, both in the church and in the community, is this has been an enormously important place in the history of the reservation. People tell us stories. Oh yeah, my grandmother went there. Oh yeah, my mom went there, or whatever. We got married there, or our grandparents got married there, or on and on and on and on. These kinds of wonderful stories. Because the church has been, for 150 years, a place of safety and of hope, in a place where very often there isn't a whole lot of that for the people that live there. So how do we get out of the way and yet enable God to do something new, whatever it is? And we quite honestly don't know what it is. We keep saying that. We don't know what the future is. God hasn't quite told us yet. But what we know is that this society is very different from ours. It's a relationship society, and it's built on story. So if I want something from Scott and he lives there, I can know that what I want to ask him about. But first of all, I have to ask him his story so that we know stories. And a couple of hours later, I might be able to say, Ann Scott, here's what I wanted to talk to you about. Our society doesn't do that. Presbyterians don't do that. Heaven's sakes, we say, I would like to move that, and we make a motion and we vote. No. No, we've been looking for a membership roll. They don't have a membership roll. They don't. You say, how many members? Because we need to do per capita. Excuse me? What we've learned is, on the reservation, there aren't memberships like that, except maybe on the soccer team. No, they are community together. They're not membership, it's anybody who comes. That's who is. A whole different way of functioning. So what we know is we need to have somebody live there. We can't have somebody just coming in and out. We need to have somebody live there to establish these relationships of trust and of story before we're going to find out what God wants to have happen. Because it's going to have to emerge from that kind of a conversation. Problem, of course, is that the manse is not occupiable. It got pretty run down. So we decided we needed to raise $150,000 for their 150th anniversary in order to begin to work on the manse, which is next door to the church. What? A parsonage for some people, where the preacher lives. And so we started asking people to make contributions. You'll have your opportunity. And we got started, and it got more complicated. We needed to replace the whole electrical system. There isn't, just for information, there's not a 3-prong outlet in the house, okay? The switch box on the outside is dangerous to open the door of. You might get electrocuted just getting into it. That's one of the things. So we got the electricians and we signed a contract, and they went in and they went up in the attic and said, we're not doing this. Because all of the insulation in the attic had been occupied by many, many, many mice and rats. So that included hazmat people coming in, and you get the picture. How do we get somebody there without a manse? We can't. We have to have a place. Well, fortunately, the Presbytery recently decided to take it on. And the trustees have voted money to redo the manse. It's now happening. We're back to studs. I mean, it's clean, it's empty. We are back to studs. And we are doing wiring and plumbing and cabinets and floors and walls and ceilings and ceiling asbestos and all of this good stuff so that it will be a place where somebody can actually live safely and reasonably comfortably in the future. And the hope is sometime this summer it might be finished, which would be wonderful, because then we can start talking about who in the world God might want to be there, maybe for a short time or for longer. That is, the church can start talking about that, because we don't get to decide. They do. In the olden days, we would probably have decided, we're going to send somebody to be your minister or whatever. We're saying, we're not going to do that, because we want it to come from them, this faithful group, and they are amazingly faithful. So that's where we are. It's actually very, very exciting where we are, because the manse is getting done, and the Presbytery is behind it.
Let me say a word about the congregation right now. On the Administrative Commission, my task, assigned task, I don't know how I got the assigned task, of securing that there would be a worship leader, a pastor, a preacher, every Sunday. And mostly, thanks to many, many, many people in the Presbytery, that's worked real well. A couple weeks ago, I called Heather, who kind of oversees that on their end, and I said, Heather, I'm so sorry, but I just don't have anybody for Sunday. She said, oh, Mom, we know what to do. We'll handle this. And so they carried on with worship, with no minister leader there. They did know what to do. They had just moved into the other room for coffee hour, where they'd sit and chat for a long time. And in comes a young man who sometimes is in worship, didn't make it that day, but he had a fresh, hot cherry pie. And he said, I made it for coffee hour. And so they are absolutely wonderful. They have grown a lot. They were very closed in at the beginning of all of this. Didn't know what to do. Their pastor was gone. They hadn't been in good relationships for a long time. And they are blossoming and growing. And I want to tell a story about Jim knew before me, and a few months ago gave me a copy of, what's the title of it? The Indigenous translation of the New Testament. I didn't know anything about it, so I was glad to get that and receive it and look through it. And the next time I was out at Warm Springs, I took it, and at coffee hour, put it on the table, and this one woman, who's very timid in many ways, she snatched it away from me. I mean, in kind of a bold gesture, and I thought, what's going on here? And she started flipping through the front, and she said, I have frequent phone conversations with so-and-so, and I wonder, he's been telling me how he's translating the New Testament. And lo and behold, he was in the front page. One of the translators doesn't live in Warm Springs, but he is a Warm Springs person, obviously knows Greek well enough to be an official translator of the New Testament into language and symbols and phrasing that would mean a lot to the indigenous people. So there's just so much going on and so much for all of us to learn that I'm so excited. Presbyterian's behind it. In the last year and a half that we've been in operation and doing this, the church is coming to life, and they have ownership, and they carry on. There haven't been very many Sundays. We haven't had a pastor there, but a couple weeks ago, that was okay. And Heather says, we can handle this. We know what to do. How many of you would say that if there was nobody leading on a Sunday morning? We can do it. And so I know after worship here, you would do it. But where they had been really pretty silenced and not involved at all, it's amazing. So, anything else?
So we see a whole lot of hope there. I mean, I painted you a really negative picture, I know, but that's because we need to know that to know the reality of what's there and the opportunity. We see it as enormous opportunity for God to do something new there. And we're really quite excited about it. We're going to be at this for a while, we know that. The Administrative Commission is the session. For those of you that like that sort of Presbyterian government stuff, we act as the session. And I feel really honored to be a part of that. I don't know if any of you have seen it, but this was the program on Sunday morning for the 150th anniversary. And you can take a look at this, and this is the church. And when we started this with $150,000 for the 150th, and we've had a whole number of churches and people begin to contribute to that, what I said was, well, you know, out of the presbytery, the whole presbytery, if only 1,000 of us gave $150, which for a lot of people is not much money. It is for some, but for a lot of people, it's what you might spend going out for dinner with your family. We'd have $150,000. Or there are people in our presbytery I know that could give $1,500. It would only take 100 of us to get the $150,000. Churches could give some money. We could give some money. So people have been doing that. So if you're interested in that, I have a little card with a QR code on it, and you can do that right to the presbytery, and we'd be delighted for you to help contribute to the future of this congregation, our only mission church in the presbytery, our only mission in the presbytery that we are now re-upping in. So any questions anybody has? Yeah. The question is, were we able to use indigenous people in the redoing of the house? The answer is no. We have a contractor that the trustees have signed agreement with, and a whole lot of people that this particular contractor works with. But you all will have an opportunity to help with the manse.
They do take care of the ground.
Yeah, the indigenous people are doing the grounds. At one point, we had some people breaking into the house, and so people on there at the reservation have installed fencing around the back with cameras and lights and that stuff, so that has now been eliminated.
And a word about that. This is the life on the res. People are desperate. They're needy and a little bit crazy because they're so needy. And so they do bad things, like try to break into a manse that's waiting for construction. The people in the church, well, that's life.
Are there more questions?
Do we have an address? It doesn't. I mean, there's a post office box somewhere, but not that I know of. Are you trying to figure out how to get to it? Okay. If you go to Warm Springs, and when you come down the hill and... What? Yeah, but if you're on the highway on 26 and you come down the hill to almost the bottom of the hill, there's a sign that says Canita that way and Warm Springs that way. Turn right and go 2 blocks and turn right, and it will be right there. Uh-huh. Right, yeah, it's that first big intersection at the bottom of the bluff.
And the sign to Warm Springs is for like the fire department, the police department, their municipal buildings. And so you'll see all of those things, but it's 2 blocks, turn right, and it's right there.
You mentioned or alluded to there that there were other churches on the reservation?
Mm-hmm.
And, I mean, how are they functioning?
There's a Catholic church, there's, I think, a Protestant, somewhat conservative. They also have native religion. They meet when they do in what they call the Longhouse, and they have ceremonies, funerals, great events in the Longhouse, and then their native kind of ceremonies around that. There's a lot of spirituality in a variety of forms, and then they try to merge that with like a church that comes in with certain ways of doing things.
Are there potential uses of youth mission trips?
Right now, no. Not this summer, because we've got construction going on and that all fenced off. And we can't handle youth mission trips until there's somebody there as pastor-type person. Because what did this 10, 12, 15 people do? They go to work or whatever. They can't manage people. So right now we have to say, thank you for the thoughts. We cannot house and manage work groups this year. Hopefully down the road that'll change.
One of the things that you all have opportunity to do besides giving money is that sometime in the late spring, we will be putting out a list of things we need to furnish the manse. So here's what we need for a bedroom, and it'll be a list. Here's what we need for another bedroom. Here's what we need for the kitchen. And a church could say, oh, we'll do the bedroom, and figure out a way to do the bedroom. Maybe somebody you know is downsizing and has a bedroom that they would like to just sort of transfer. That's an opportunity that's going to be coming to all the churches.
Let me add on to, I said no youth groups right now. A church group, and here, think about this. We have one church in the Presbytery, small church, Springwater, one Sunday closed their door, put a sign on it. We're not open for worship this Sunday. Encouraged anybody who was not going with them to please go to church someplace. But they had a couple carloads of people. They went out and led worship, and you wouldn't have to be leaders of worship, but you could take a carload or two any Sunday and be out there for worship. But one church did that and just sent I think it was 2 carloads of people out to lead worship and have fellowship time with them. So there are a variety of ways. Either just go on your own and be there, or get a groupie and go, or sign up with me to lead worship. You don't have to have your pastor. You know how to lead worship. I've been here now. I know you know what worship entails. You could do it. So.
And the thing that has happened for them is they feel connected. They felt so unconnected from the rest of the church for so many years. And now they're feeling enormous support and connection and encouragement because of giving and because of all these people coming in and visitors. And that's a gift we can give them.
Would the congregation or the group be,
Use the microphone.
would the congregation, quote, group, be agreeable to people just dropping in for church on Sunday?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yes, oh yeah. Yeah, if you happen to be just dropping in, they would love that. Worship is at 10.
And you might even think, here's a radical idea. You've got a pastor. Maybe somebody else could be here. He could go. I don't know, just a thought, just a thought.
You could also bring something for the coffee hour along the way. And share with them afterwards and get to know some of them.
Or if a whole group of you went, a potluck. They love potlucks.
And it sounds like if somebody knows a very generous piano tuner here in the Portland area, they should be talking to them.
I've got an ad in on that. It was Heather's piano. I think they're doing okay right now.
Thank you all.